Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to start putting back together this A727 transmission, take all of the sub-assemblies we've built in other videos, and start putting them into this case. Let's get to it. I scrubbed off this case a bit, got all the large stuff off of it. I'm trying to prevent dirt from falling down in. The original plan here was to take my time, get this transmission all built to go behind the Magnum that's going to go into my Power Wagon. Well, it turns out that this week my son blew up the transmission in his 78 tin grill, so we need this in more of an emergency scenario. So I'm not going to worry about getting it all cleaned up. We're just going to get it assembled. We'll put this in with a long tail shaft, then we'll pull the transmission out of his truck and we'll tear it apart, take a look at what happened in it, and build it for the Magnum. So slight change of direction, but same process. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to put in the overrun clutch or the sprag right down in this area. The original plan was I was going to take this out and replace it with a one-piece sprag. But since we're in kind of a rush and I don't have that part, we're just going to put this one back together with all of these pieces here. Basically, the inside is a series of these roller bearings and springs. Remember, the spring pushes the roller uphill. I'm going to put some assembly lube throughout all of this and on the rollers, just to help things stay in place and again, to lubricate things at startup. At this point, double check that they're all pushing uphill. Now this race is going to go in. We'll see how this goes. I am going to lubricate the outside of this just because. That didn't go too bad. So turn it clockwise as you push down, and it seems to seat pretty well. You can see, though, it turns this way, but it does not turn that way, and that's what it's supposed to do. Next up is the low reverse servo piston, which goes here. It's the one that looks like this. This seal comes with the trans kit, so I'm going to swap it. The cup goes toward the face here. Now we want to lubricate this seal. Piston goes in. If you rotate it, that seal will go past that spot for the ring. Once you have that in, this spring, cap, and ring have to go on. I'm going to lay this flat so that I can get at it a little easier. So the plan is I'm going to push this in by hand, get one end of this ring in, and then walk it all the way around. There we go. Not super easy, but it went. Alright, next up is the low reverse band. It's this bigger one. I've pre-soaked it in ATF. We also need this small strut. So, run in, put it around here, then rotate this so it's kind of out of our way. This part of the band catches on this strut here. Then we rotate this one back, and this one It's going to go right down in between there. Make sure the band is completely inside here. Wiggle it around to make sure you've got it. Now this strut is going to go long ways in here. I'm going to compress the band manually. It has to fully seat back in this groove here, which is what I just did with that screwdriver. Next, I'm going to drop this low reverse drum down in. Get it fully seated down in here. Next, we're going to drop in the output shaft and drive shell with this rear planetary. Make sure that the external teeth on that planetary go all the way down into this drum. At this point, there's a little thrust washer that needs to go right on here. I'm going to lubricate it and drop it on. Next, we'll put in the kickdown servo here, which is this one, followed by this, and then a snap ring to hold it. I'm going to lubricate this bore first. I'm going to use a welding clamp to help push this in. That worked shockingly well. Next, we're going to drop in the rear clutch. Before I do, make sure I lubricate this bushing and lubricate that where the mating surface is. Unless these teeth are all perfectly aligned, it's not going to drop straight down. You're going to have to wiggle it back and forth as they go down over that drum. You'll know that you have this rear clutch fully installed when this surface is even with or just a little bit below this edge of the drive shell. If it's sticking up at all, it means that one of the clutches or two of the clutches haven't yet aligned, so you have to keep wiggling it till it drops down in here. When you get all the way up to the kickdown band, it's not going to assemble properly. I know this because I had to take it all apart to get here. Alright, I've lifted it up onto the bench. Now we have to put in this output shaft support. I'm going to lubricate inside here and outside here first. Alright, then we just slide it on. It's got one hole here and then three, so it's asymmetric. These three go down to those. Make sure it's all the way tight against the case before you put bolts in, tighten them down, otherwise you'll crack it. Up next is this front clutch assembly. I'm going to lubricate this bushing, and then it drops in like this with the clutches down toward that rear. Just like when we dropped the lower one in, when we drop this front clutch in, the teeth on all of the clutch frictions aren't going to be aligned, so you have to wiggle it around until you get it all the way down. When you drop the front clutch assembly in, these teeth will engage with the drive shell. If they don't, you haven't got it aligned up here. So keep wiggling around, moving it until they drop in. Next, we're going to install this Kickdown Band. One of the performance upgrades that you can do, and I had intended to do but don't have the part here, is this strut. You can get a heavier duty one that doesn't flex. So this is just a stock one. We're going to put it back in here. So we want to install this lever first. It's going to go right here. Next, this pin goes in. These two grooves go up. We have to drop it down from inside the bell housing here. So right in through here. And then this threaded plug goes in there to hold it in place. There are a few different styles of Kickdown Band. I've got this one, and I have this one. Notice how this ear runs all the way to the edge. That's important to know because this gap you need to have up. This one, you can put either direction, this way or this way. Not going to be a problem. You try putting this one in with that up, you'll never get it in. I know because I've spent the last 20 minutes trying to get it in till I realized if I just flip it over like this, it's going to fit. Yes, I'm an idiot. This strut is going to go under here and under this edge. On this other side, this piece goes under this edge, and then the adjusting screw comes in through a hole right here from the outside of the case. So I'm going to run this in a little bit, loosen this all the way up so I've got plenty of motion. Alright, I'm going to flip this on its back. This is too much of a pain to do with gravity fighting me. Alright, so I'm going to start with this, put it on this adjuster, and push the band around. And that'll hold this in place. And slide this up. In there. It's really loose and still needs to be adjusted, but it's at least in place. There are some tabs right here that there's a little split in that and this that go on that to help align it. Next up is the pump. There's a seal on the outside of here. I'm going to take that off, replace it with one that came with the kit. The kit also came with a new gasket, and this seals underneath here between the pump and the case. Now make sure you lubricate this so that it doesn't go in dry, grab onto that seal and rip it. As we put it in, we've got a vent hole here. This goes to the top. These pressure lines go to the bottom. These pump bolts here, that's what they look like. The kit came with new crush washers or sealing washers, so they'll help seal. I'm also going to put RTV on them, which is really important on these lower ones where there's pressure. Just helps prevent leaks in the future. Next up is this governor. It's got two of these metal sealing rings on it. I was going to replace them both, but the kit that I have doesn't have an interlocking one like this. They're both this style, so I'm going to leave this one on. It looks fine, and I'm going to replace this one. Before we put the governor on the shaft, we're going to take this piece and put it in here from the inside. That way we don't have to take that snap ring off. Before it goes in, lubrication, just like everything else. It goes in with its snap ring facing out. The governor is going to go on like this, down into this rear support. We want to lubricate this, and then this hole aligns with this hole here. You can see they're lined up here. Then we'll lubricate the other half. Notice the larger part goes toward the outside. And we'll put the E-clip on the end here. Last remaining item for the governor is this snap ring. It's going to go into a groove right here. You might have to grab onto the shaft and lift it up just a little bit to give you some space. Looks just like that. Alright, governor's installed. Next, we're going to put in the output shaft bearing, which goes here. Next, we're going to put in the output shaft bearing. It's got a snap ring that goes both below and above it. They're the same thickness. Next goes the bearing. You can see it's got this ring groove. That needs to go toward the front of the transmission. So in this case, it's going to go down. Then another snap ring to hold it in place. That rear bearing is now installed. Next up is going to be the output shaft housing. Before I put this housing on, I'm going to take the seal out of the back, replace it, and clean it up a little bit. There is a bushing right here in the very tail of this. This one doesn't look terrible, and I only have one. So if I go to replace this and I destroy the one that I have, I can't get this thing back together. So I'm going to leave this bushing in here. Well, I made a rookie mistake. I didn't actually crawl underneath that truck and look at the tail shaft before I started this. It's actually got a short tail shaft with a bolt-on yoke. So this tail shaft has to come back off. I do have a short one here, so I have the stuff to swap it. It's a real pain and time wasted. Alright, I have the correct output shaft on here now. We can continue. And put in the accumulator piston next. Put some lubrication on both of these sealing rings. Then we've got the return spring goes on here. Before we put the valve body in, I'm going to swap out this seal here for the shift lever and kickdown. Just take that guy out like that, and then we'll tap in the new one. Before we put the valve body in, we can do some tests and adjustments. First, we'll make sure the front clutch is doing what it's supposed to. This hole right here is the front clutch apply. Put in air and listen. You should hear a thud sound as the piston in there is doing its thing. The next hole over is the rear clutch apply. We want to put air there and listen for that piston moving. If you look right in here, you'll see that piston moving with the rear apply. Next, check the front servo apply. If we apply pressure here, this should activate. You can see that that came out and this band applied. Do the same thing with your rear servo apply. This should activate and close your band here. Okay, everything appears to be moving and doing what it's supposed to do. Now let's adjust these bands. First, loosen this lock nut. This lock nut must move freely around this adjusting screw. Next, we're going to torque this inside screw down to 72 inch-pounds. Make sure this nut is out of the way. It is a square head, so you need a 4 or 8-sided socket. This one is 5/16. We're going to torque it to 72 inch-pounds. Once you have it at 72 inch-pounds, I'm going to mark where up is. Then we're going to back it off 2 full turns from there. There's 2 full turns. Now we want to tighten the lock nut without turning the screw. There we go. Backed out 2 turns from 72 inch-pounds. This low reverse band is now ready. Now let's do the kickdown band. It's the exact same procedure. We're going to loosen the lock nut, run the adjusting screw in to 72 inch-pounds, then back it out 2 turns. That adjustment is out here. We're at 72. Back it out 2 turns. We tighten this lock nut. Bands are adjusted. We can now put in that valve body. What's important here is I have this parking lever already installed, and this parking lever is from a 727, even though the valve body is from a 904. Shift it all the way into low here, which pushes this rod as far this direction as it can go. Run the parking lever up through this hole in the case. Then align the shift levers. And now we just have to bolt it in. This is the bolt that's different between a 727 and a 904. Alright, I got a new bearing and seal for this. This bearing is somewhat of a unicorn for these short shaft transmissions. I'll probably do another video that shows the differences between them. So this bearing is going to go in. Snap ring sits on top of it to hold it in. Then the seal goes in on top of that. Anytime you put a seal in, make sure you put some lubrication on this lip so that it's not dry when you assemble. And then in goes the seal. Alright, now it's time to put the housing on the tail shaft. We have a gasket here. This big opening is what this parking sprag lever goes through. This parking lever, it's got a little ball-shaped thing on the end. Goes right in here. It pushes that little arm down to engage parking sprag here. Takes a little bit of force to put in, but not a lot. Line up the holes in the gasket and bolt it down. We're going to pull the rear yoke and the speedometer gear drive from this transmission that we're replacing. Any guesses on why it needs to be replaced? We'll do another video of a tear down of this just to see what happened inside there. Might be interesting. Before you install this rear yoke, clean it up and inspect it. I've got a couple of them here. What can happen is this seal gets old and hard, and it will actually wear a groove. You can see it here in that yoke. If you don't have another one, you don't have a whole lot of options. You can put it back in. There may be some sort of a sleeve that can be put on that. Fortunately, I have another one here. This one looks pretty good, so I'll put this one on. Next, we're going to put in the Speedo drive gear. The kit came with a new seal for here, so I'm going to replace that first. As with all seals, lubricate. This one had the 39 to 45 up. Up is that direction. Then this hold down has two claws that go into these notches. Alright, it's back together. You may have noticed that little repair there. This pan had been repaired at some point in the past, and they had used brazing, but they'd done a poor job. It was just a lump up here and nothing on the inside. Trying to clean that up so you can weld it is really hard to get rid of all of the brass. So I just went back in with some silicon bronze, did this side and the inside to clean it up. But we're done. Just needs to be put in. Thanks for watching.